Suzanne Arms, what an honor to have you with us today. Welcome to Prenatal Alliance. You are such an activist. You're such a grande dame in the birth universe. Tell us, since your best-selling book, Immaculate Deception, how is birth nowadays? How is our understanding of birth?
Well, first of all, I want to say when I say birth, I mean that whole period of time from preconception as the egg and the sperm are getting ready for conception, and epigenetic factors can change the quality of the male sperm and the female egg, all the way to age 1. That's what I call birth, because you can say when conception occurs, but you cannot really say, oh, when does labor occur? Does labor start when the mucus plug of the woman's cervix, lets go? Does it start with the first contractions, which might be weeks before the actual contractions of labor, and so on? You can say when the baby emerges from the mother's body, but in terms of the first breath, in terms of the changes that that baby goes through as a biological organism that happen over the next 48 hours as things open and close and shift, as it moves from being an aquatic being to an air-breathing being that actually has to sustain its own temperature and breathe. These things are really important, and yet people talk about birth as if it's just the actual event of active labor, say, till when the baby comes out. So I'd like to say that first of all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. For me, birth starts at preconception. The idea I have of having a baby or not before I conceive. So yes, we have exactly the same approach.
Yes.
So that universe, how are things going? What do you see?
And I really agree with a number of indigenous people around the world who feel that the soul comes from the world of the ancestors, and that each baby comes bearing a gift, a unique gift this soul brings. And depending on how that child is nurtured and protected and served, that gift can either be released and given to the world, or it can be stunted, or it can die without ever having given its gift. So I believe in that. And when I look at what's happening in birth, which is basically, it's like the military industrial complex, it has nothing to do with the sacredness of bringing a human life into the world. And the caring for this dyad, this mother-baby system, which is one system from preconception, really, to as long as that baby is breastfeeding. They're on the same wavelength. Their brain waves are the same. Anyway, so what has happened since Immaculate Deception came out in 1975? And I focused on the mother. I focused on women because I was self-centered. I was involved with my own story of what happened to me. It took me a long time to grow into an understanding of what happened to the baby, and the baby being the critical important being, and then the mother baby, and then the family and the father, and then the community. So as I grew over the years from 1975, when that came out, and watched what was going on around the world in birth, I would say, just like the opening to the Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We have basically not changed the fundamental paradigm that drives birth. And it's a paradigm of, well, Michel Audin, as the physician from France, is the one who really has said the most about it. it's like the difference between organic, natural, small farming and industrialized single crop farming. It's night and day. And many things have changed. The names of the drugs that are given to women have changed. We have doulas now who, in some ways, protect a rotten system, and in some ways are absolutely critically important because they are the ones who stand by the woman, ideally meeting her before labor begins and keeping on with her after the baby comes. But they are there as an intermediary in the system and a non-medical, non-nursing person. But basically, although many things are different, nothing has fundamentally changed. And that breaks my heart and enrages me because it's been 48 years since that book came out. And we know so much more about the biology of the female body. We know so much more. We still don't know how labor actually begins, but we know the baby initiates labor. But we don't know some of the mechanisms. We know so much more, and yet none of it have changed a system that is dominated by patriarchal control, whether it's in the hands of women who are behaving in a patriarchal manner. Which one of us went to medical school? You know, that could be a woman that says that. I remember women who OB residents at Stanford University Medical Center who wore their feminist pin and wore Birkenstocks, which were the hippie shoes. And yet they treated women worse than some of the older, easygoing male OBs whose egos weren't invested in it anymore. Yeah. So when I say it's a patriarchal system, it is a system built on dominance, suppression of, and even the extinction of the feminine. And this is the most feminine of all processes, giving birth.
Yeah, the sacred feminine is ignored by
so we act as if we're going to war against nature, and that's what we do. Yes. So I'd say virtually nothing has changed. We've become much more sophisticated. There is the beginning of an international movement that is part of the whole rising up of women to claim their voice, but it's still really small. Women are completely preoccupied with fear, and that is culturally bred, but also bred by the amount of toxic births that happened in their lineage to their mother, their grandmother, their great-grandmother. Women are preoccupied with fear throughout labor, and once they start approaching the time of labor, like maybe even just 6 months, then they're preoccupied with what am I going to do with my baby when I have to go back to work, which in the United States is within 2 to 4 weeks after giving birth. The woman is still bleeding inside. She still has mucus. She has bloody, she still isn't in any shape recovered. And biologically, her body isn't really back to what you could call normal for 4 years after giving birth.
And the baby needs her, and the baby needs her. So even if they go, no, 6 months will be fine. 6 months, babies.
In a country like ours that has no universal guaranteed paid maternity leave, much less paternity leave, that has no supports for small businesses to employ new mothers who have a baby, say 6 months or 9 months, and they want to work a few hours a week and move into part-time or job shift. There is no structure in the country and no support for this. Now, when I was researching in Holland, I saw something very different because, of course, it was socialized medicine. And in the United States, it's medicine for profit. But the government had claimed a stake in birth and in the well-being of children and families and women and midwives. So, for example, a midwife served the whole community. She could go to the hospital and fill her bag, her midwifery bag, with whatever supplies she needed and go home. If she's attending a woman at a home birth and the woman needs to be transferred, she doesn't lose taking care of that woman. She continues into the hospital to control what happens, in other words, to keep the system away. And it's called a relocated home birth. Now that says it all.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So what they did in Holland is they created these commissions to come up with the guidelines that midwives needed to follow and be aware of. And they included very extensive list reasons why a midwife needs to consult with a physician, not give the physician the care of the woman, but to consult. Reasons why a midwife needs to bring in a physician. And we have nothing like that. And in our country, at least, doctors are paid not per person, not to keep people well, they are paid per intervention. So they're paid per medical intervention. So when a doctor is doing an epidural, and the vast majority of women in the United States and in many parts of the world now get this form of spinal anesthesia called epidural, the anesthesiologist gets paid for the insertion of it, and then for every hour it is in. Now that means the anesthesiologist has no reason to come late into labor. The anesthesiologist is often the first doctor the woman sees in labor. Hi, I'm here to sell you drugs. So, when you talk about a capitalist system, we really spread that around the world. And it has hit socialized medicine. And it actually influenced birth and midwifery's practice in Holland when the two leading figures who protected natural birth and protected midwives, both of whom were obstetricians, one woman, Nettie Klomp, one man, Dr. Kloosterman. They headed the University of Amsterdam Medical School and the Department of Obstetrics and the training of physicians, and they headed the Amsterdam Midwifery School, the Kwik School. And they alternated, they switched. So for a certain number of years, Nettie would be with the midwife training, and then she'd move to the head of the obstetric training. I mean, it worked beautifully.
How interesting. How interesting.
It's so interesting. And in addition to the government setting this up and there being two strong advocates for natural birth and for midwifery, and midwifery remaining an independent profession. You could not be a nurse and be a midwife. So in addition to that, they also created a birth center 20 miles from the University of Amsterdam Hospital to study and find out what percentage of women could safely birth outside the hospital if they were within a 20-minute drive from a hospital. Now that has never been done or replicated. And what they found out, because this study had just come out when I went there in 1974 for the first time, what they found out was that something like 87% of women could birth there. 70% first-time moms, 93% women who'd already given birth. In other words, the vast majority of women could birth safely, normally, without intervention, with a midwife within 20 minutes of the hospital. Now, in addition to that, there was a culture that said, I, as a woman, am capable of birthing this baby. I can labor. I expect to labor. I expect to labor at home. So the vast majority of women birthed at home. Even in the early 70s, it was like 70% or something.
And it's changing now, and it's changing.
It's all changing in Holland because the younger obstetricians got swept up in the modernization of obstetrics, largely as a result of US professors of obstetrics going to visit Amsterdam and speaking to the obstetricians. Now, Holland is a small country, and just like New Zealand, has a certain amount of embarrassment of being a small country and not feeling that it is one of the big guys. So, of course, they listened. And when I was there in 73 at the Grand Rounds, an American obstetrician came to speak and show his slides. In the front rows were all of the midwives from the city of Amsterdam and the retired midwives, many of whom were quite old. And then behind them were the obstetricians. Now, when I went to England, it was very interesting because the midwives stood in the back of the room until all the doctors had come in and settled themselves in the front rows for Grand Rounds. Then the midwives came in and sat down. Now, doesn't it say a lot?
Yeah.
That's the culture
and it has
dominance.
Yes, and it has a huge repercussion. The baby being born of the woman treated one way or the other is already gathering messages from life. Everything from prenatal care to the way I am birthed and breastfed will help me to be that kind of politician or the other kind of politician, that kind of a poet or another kind of a poet. The impact is huge, this very first development. And you know that, and sometimes you wonder about politicians.
Yes. Well, I want to say one thing people need to understand is that every one of our emotions is a matter of biochemistry, chemical. And so the chemistry of emotions, which was studied first by women and poo-pooed because it was studied by women, but the chemistry of emotions, it goes straight to the baby. The baby is receiving everything the mother feels, thinks, believes, her level of trust or fear, and what's in her environment. So if she lives in a poverty-stricken neighborhood and there's gunfire going off regularly and backfiring of cars and there's gangs, she's going to have a very different world that she brings her baby in. And that baby is going to be attuning itself to prepare for a dangerous world. And unfortunately, that's happening in war-torn countries. It's happening in countries with famine. And most violence and famine is created by male-dominated systems and men anyway. And I often have women say to me, well, there are a lot of bad mothers, and women can do terrible things to babies, to which my husband, who is a man, and I will both say yes. And I'd like to go back to that woman's early life and find out who hurt her. And it's usually a man. Who betrayed her? And it's usually a man. But the primary responsibility for growing a baby is the mother. And women don't want to accept that. Women, and I'm a feminist by name, by calling, but women do not want to accept that we are responsible ultimately because it's our bodies.
But they don't want that. Well, my friends, the feminists from France, people whom I adore, all the Simone de Beauvoir clique and Jean-Paul Sartre and the woman, they tell me that I am too biological. Yes, but my love, you digest, you sleep, you go pee. Those are biological things. I want to honor the biology of women. My feminism is nature feminism. I mean, I would never exclude the importance of men, but I see how gorgeous to be a woman. Even if I have 3 PhDs, I have a body. But they say it's a threat to them, to their system of feminism. Isn't that
That's right. And it is nature feminism. And the highest role, the most evolved form of the masculine is that in service of the feminine, not in domination of, but in service of the feminine. And that means protecting it. That means making sure, like a group of elephants that are surrounding the laboring mother and protecting her, or the men who are standing in a ring around a woman's circle in a tribal village, and they are standing with their spears and they're facing out so that they're looking to make sure no harm can come, but they're not listening to what's going on with the privacy of the women in the village. That's the high masculine. The high masculine is in the service of the feminine. So instead, you have mothers who defer to their mother-in-law, who might be carrying very masculine messages about this baby needing to be genitally mutilated or cut, or the baby boy needing to have a circumcision. And the mother will say, well, I don't have a penis and this is a baby boy, and so I think his father, who has a penis, is the one who needs to make the decision. Wrong. Women need to stand and protect their babies. I have observed, and I've certainly felt it in my own life, that the greatest anger an abused child has in growing up is toward the mother. Yeah. Whether or not she was the person who caused the harm or didn't give what that child needed.
Yeah, she was supposed to protect the baby. Even violent birth.
That's a biological imperative. The child expects the mother to protect. And we don't protect the mother. So very few women are able to fully protect their children. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense, because none of the songs, the movies, the cultural ways we go here and there, the way we dress, nothing reminds women of that extraordinary mission she has, because the baby will look at her. She might be suffering obstetrical violence, and he panics. She cannot defend me. She cannot even defend herself. Oh my goodness, what kind of world is
this? Ideally, that's what the new profession of the doula is there to do. But it's a challenge, because if she goes into the hospital to care for the woman and she speaks up about obstetric violence or unnecessary intervention, she's likely to be thrown out of the hospital. Now, if the women don't know this, but if the woman says when she comes into the hospital, I have a piece of paper here and it says that this is my doula, she speaks on behalf of me. If I, for any reason, don't say something, she will be the one to say and protect what my baby and I need. And then the hospital can't do anything. But short of that, and most people don't know this, the baby belongs to the hospital once the baby is out of the woman's body, unless it's in the arms of the doula and the mother has said, she is my voice, my protector, or the arms of the father, or in the mother's arms. Once that baby is separated, that baby belongs to the hospital. And all hell breaks loose when the mother tries to leave with the baby.
Yeah, it's amazing. And we are being born for so long and we still haven't figured it out. I've read books from 16th century birth in the countryside of France or in the big towns. Birth was a nightmare. Midwives were not even paid a loaf of bread. They would give the mother and the baby newborn a little bit of water with wine to try to revive them if they were not doing well. All the neighbors would come. So birth that is supposed to be so intimate, so private, was exposed. Look at how interesting. We've gone in other directions and we forget intimacy and we forget love. I think this is something against love making, the censorship of love.
And this is not just done by men. This is done by a system of patriarchy.
Yeah.
This is done by religious injunction. This is done by family tradition, where, for example, in many places, the first one to hold the baby is the mother-in-law or the grandmother. The mother doesn't get to hold her own baby. And this goes on and on and on. And until we get to the root of the problem and name it, you can't really change it. You're just going to be changing the wallpaper in the room. So you need a government to protect the people who protect birth, and those are midwives. And you need the government, as it was in Holland in the past, that gave in these commissions where they brought together midwives and obstetricians and family physicians and psychologists and sociologists and social workers. They brought them in a room to come up with these guidelines. You need a government that gives more weight to the midwife, because the doctors will always carry more weight socially in the society. So it's and I say one of the things that has to change in a capitalist society is that everyone who cares for a childbearing woman should have the same responsibilities for keeping her and the baby healthy, and seeing her as early in the pregnancy as possible and carrying through months after birth, and get paid for the full care of the woman and get paid the same amount. Now, if doctors were paid the same as a home birth midwife, boy, would you see things change. If they were not paid for procedures, but they were paid to keep people healthy and paid for the service of care, I mean, isn't that what we really need? Because the mother-baby unit and the father and family are a very vulnerable, innately vulnerable unit.
Yeah, but Michel Laurent, whom you quoted already, he said we also should change the way we select students for nursing, for midwifery, for all the caring professions, doctors, even teachers. We are selecting kind of the wrong kind of people by the way we select them to enter university. And we might be missing on extraordinary people with their intuition and altruism, but who might not be able to get that kind of exam. I don't know. And also I see that we are despising the future by the way we are welcoming humans on earth. We're despising our own future, the future of our nations, because it will all show up later on.
Yeah. And you know, there are people who really aren't meant to take care of other people. They should be researchers.
Yeah.
They should be administrators, but they should not be in contact with the childbearing woman and her family. And those people should be weeded out and moved into positions that are not patient care. But we don't do that. And at least in the United States, a lot of people going into pre-med who are planning to be physicians, they just don't have the right temperament. Midwifery and obstetrics should be a craft, an art, a high art form. And only certain people are really qualified for that. But that means the government has a say. And I happen to be a democratic socialist. I believe in democracy, but I also do not believe in capitalism. I I believe in free enterprise where it is, but I don't believe that capitalism goes together with democracy very well. And you've seen that in the
Much
United States.
greed, too much greed.
You see it in England. I mean, you see it in a lot of countries that are falling to authoritarian rule. Who are these people making these decisions and waging wars? They are, as far as I can see, people who suffer from trauma and attachment disorder and shame-based religion and family life. And the people who are most vulnerable are boys, because they are innately more fragile than girls. And you look at the biology of the boy and his brain and how he grows and what trauma does to him versus what it does to a girl baby of the same gestational age. He will act out more aggressively, more with self-harming behavior as a toddler, in part dependent on whether his father, in the weeks prior to conception, was having an alcoholic binge or high on drugs, or just lost his job, or suffered from a deep depression. It affects the boy child, the boy baby, more than the girl.
Yeah. As if we are more prepared to be resilient. And they have such a strength, but they are more vulnerable. It must be just beautiful to be the mother of a man.
Yeah.
The responsibility is huge.
Yeah. So, to go back to the thing I said at the very beginning, it's like Dickens wrote in The Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. People who are having extraordinary lives and conscious conceptions and in utero lives and pregnant lives and extraordinary births, ecstatic births, and in the year following are really nurtured and cared for and have enough privacy, enough social support. They're creating magnificent human beings who will be ready to take over when these people die. If we survive as a race, because of course we're on this path of self-destruction that was put into place by a system called patriarchy, where you plunder the earth.
Yeah, with no respect for the elements, what we do to the air, to the waters, yeah, to the earth, all the pollutants. Yeah,
and this could change in one generation.
Yeah, in one generation, a huge change. In 2 generations, already to have something steady going on. I mean, let's take all this epigenetics in our favor and transform. And life wants that. We take care of life. It grows. It's almost exponential. Life says yes to health so much more easily than to disease.
That's right. Of course, that affects the whole organism in terms of its long-term health or chronic illness. But when you look at a culture and you want to see just how it treats the most vulnerable, the most sensitive, the most tender, whether it's nature itself, or whether it's the quality of the water, or whether it's mother-baby care, or whether it's returning war veterans, take a look at how they speak about breastfeeding. Take a look at how they speak about paying for full maternity leave through the first year or 2 after life. In the United States, in the halls of Congress, you have people talking about paying for childcare or maternity or paternity leave as sucking on the tit. Now, and that's said so disparagingly.
Yeah, it is.
Utter despicable attitude about the woman's breast.
Yeah. It shows how they were treated when they needed a breast.
Shows how they were treated, exactly. And when you look, you also see shaming, and that religion has an awful lot to do with that. You know, the shaming of the female body, the shaming of meeting a child's needs. If you're going to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Are you still sucking on your mother's tit?
Yeah.
We over and over again. We hear it in Mexico, Catholic country. We hear it in the Middle East.
In Brazil. Brazil. It's funny because we really work against ourselves by the perpetrators just keep the system going. I remember Marshall Klaus, one of the fathers of the doulas, saying the only reason for a doula to exist is to be a cushion against between the hospital violence and the laboring woman. But if everything was going normally, we wouldn't need anything.
And I really want to see people like me, like you, ordinary people, speak up when we hear these terms and say, wait a minute, just as people are learning to speak up when they're confronting racist language. Excuse me, did you just say?
Perfect.
Did I hear you say? And that needs to be said immediately. Yeah, but you know, in talking about the doula, the newest person involved in birth, it's very, very difficult because the majority of doulas understandably see their primary role as caring for the childbearing woman, the woman in labor, and making her feel good and giving her what she wants. Well, what she wants may be an unnecessary cesarean because she knows nothing about what that does to the baby, what that does to her long-term recuperation, and her chances of having problems arise from having had a cesarean in the future. And most doulas are nervous about being advocates for natural birth, advocates for biology, advocates for the baby, because the baby and the mother are pitted against each other, right?
And it's true. If I'm an advocate, if I go with my ideology, I'm not listening. Some C-sections should happen right away. Why wait? Others should never happen. But how to understand? You have to be receptive. You can be a doula, you can be a doctor, you can be
and it's a fine line, you know. I've actually told doulas that I feel that if they get interviewed by a woman who tells them that she's planning to have an epidural birth or planning to have a cesarean, and a scheduled cesarean, which means there's no medical reason for it, I suggest they say, oh, really? Well, I didn't say this before, but I actually charge $500 extra for your care because I'm the one that's going to be carrying the full burden and emotions of the birth. You're going to be numb. So I'm going to have a lot of extra work in having to really hold the field of energy for the birth and for this baby. And for that extra money, I will donate it to the Black Doulas Association, or I will take on women who have no money to pay me. So I do understand you have a right to choose those things, but I'm wondering whether anybody has ever given you any idea about the possible complications for you and your baby, immediate and long term.
This is important. But Suzanne, I sense there is hope. I wanted this much more to be accomplished these last 10 years, for instance, because we know so much. Why not apply science to all this social understanding? Yeah. It's not just biology or politics, it's everything together. We could be doing much better. but I still see, when you were describing the gorgeous kind of pregnancy and conception and birth, it is happening more and more. It's too rare, too seldom, but it is happening.
Yes, it is. And those who are having extraordinary experiences bringing children into the world and raising them without punishment, without abuse, who are well supported, are raising generations of children who are going to be capable of taking leadership in the world.
Yes.
And I see more and more of it. I see more and more young men under the age of 30, who are not frightened of their feminine qualities, which means the ability to cry, which means the ability to feel their own vulnerability and tenderness and acknowledge it. And that gives me great hope. And, you know, these cultural shifts can happen. I remember a day when men did not carry their babies in public. Men did not go shopping with a baby. Men today wear their babies. Now, a lot of times they're wearing their baby face out.
Yeah.
Which is just all wrong because it's what I call wearing the baby as a hood ornament to a car, because basically babies need to be protected from the outer world for many months. So they need to be worn in a way that they can turn away from stimulation. And these babies are getting hyperstimulated, but they do have their back against their father's chest, which gives them some grounding. And I just am so excited to see men doing this and choosing to stay home and parent and saying, now that COVID has happened, I don't want to go back to work full time. And so, you know, that's a cultural shift.
Yes, it is. And this is how Prenatal Alliance was born. Let's put all these professionals all over the world thinking together about that. And then let's also get the general public, and that gets professionals who are unknown. They have not written books, they're not in famous hospitals, but they're thinking about this whole process, this consciousness you're talking about. So rich with consequences. We want to address all that in Prenatal Alliance. And I thank you so much, Suzanne, to have been with us today.
And I would encourage people to look at my charity's website called birthingthefuture.org, because I really love to look at the big picture and connect the dots between the seemingly unconnected issues like breastfeeding and the war in Ukraine.
Perfect.
Or, you know, attachment parenting and the criminal justice system run awry, and all of these Native American boys and Black boys in the prison pipeline because society has not just not met their needs, but the trauma that they have dealt with coming from a background of trauma for generations and generations. It's now being understood. People are beginning to talk about intergenerational, cultural, social trauma.
Yes. Yes.
And they're beginning to talk about adverse childhood experiences known as ACEs, ACE. And instead of asking a child who in the classroom is acting out, why are you so bad? The guidance counselor or teacher is trained to say, what happened to you? And ask for that child's story. So yes, there's good reasons for hoping. And we don't know what will be the trim tab in the boat that, you know, that actually shifts.
True.
It's a small thing. It will happen. But when the practices around childbirth from preconception through shift, we will see everything from addiction to delinquency to depression to anxiety to war and aggression drop.
I love it. Oh, really, Suzanne, thank you. And we'll keep talking. Prenatal Alliance need the likes of you. Bye-bye. Merci.
Ciao.